The rain had been falling since morning, a steady rhythm against the windows of the small apartment. Inside, a woman in her late 20s sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the letter in her trembling hands. Her eyes moved over the words, again and again, as if hoping the letters might rearrange themselves into something different, something less painful. The letter was short and cold. It said her job at the hospital was ending next week. Budget cuts, restructuring. Nothing personal, they wrote, but it felt deeply personal to her. She had given that hospital 5 years of her lifelong nights, endless shifts, missed holidays. All so patients could feel safe and cared for. And now, with a single piece of paper, it was all over. She folded the letter carefully, like folding it neatly would make it hurt less, but the ache in her chest only grew heavier. The apartment was silent except for the rain. There was no one she could tell, no one to lean on. Her parents lived in another city, her friends were busy with their own lives, and she had always been too independent to ask anyone for help. She moved to the tiny kitchen and poured herself a cup of tea, but even that felt like too much effort. Her hands shook as she held the cup. Her mind kept spinning. How will I pay rent? What about groceries? The electricity bill? She had some savings, but not enough to last long. The hospital had been her life. That afternoon, she forced herself to go outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air was cold and heavy. She walked through the streets with her umbrella, avoiding puddles, keeping her head down so no one would see the tears that kept slipping out, no matter how hard she tried to stop. At the grocery store, she stood in front of the shelves, calculating prices in her head before picking anything up. She had never been this careful before. She had always lived modestly, but now every coin mattered. Every single one. On her way back, she passed by the hospital where she had worked all those years. She looked up at the tall building, the bright lights inside, the people coming and going. Her throat tightened. She could almost see herself inside, moving from room to room, checking patients, giving medicine, offering comfort to scared families. It had been more than just a job. It had been her identity. She turned away quickly before anyone she knew could spot her. Back at home, she changed into dry clothes and sat by the window. The rain had stopped now, leaving the streets shining under the streetlights. Cars moved slowly, their tires hissing over the wet road. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an old colleague at the hospital. Just a casual hello, nothing about the job loss. No one really knew yet. She typed a quick reply, pretending everything was fine. She didn't want pity. She didn't want people to look at her differently. As the night stretched on, she made a simple dinner, bread and soup, and ate it slowly. She thought about looking for another job, but the idea felt too heavy right now. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she would start searching. Tonight, she just wanted to rest, to breathe, to let the shock settle. She moved to the small balcony outside her apartment. The air was cool and fresh after the rain. Down below, the city moved on like nothing had happened. People laughed as they passed by. A child ran after his father. A delivery man handed over a package at the building across the street. Life didn't stop because hers had changed. She watched the lights for a long time, her arms wrapped around herself. Somewhere inside, she still had a small flame of hope. Things couldn't stay this way forever, she told herself. Something had to change, but she didn't know then that change was already on its way. The next morning started quietly. She woke up to the sound of birds outside her window, but it did little to ease the weight in her chest. She had barely slept. Thoughts about rent, food, and the future had kept her awake for most of the night. She made a cup of tea and sat at the small table in her kitchen, staring at the steam rising slowly from the cup. It was strange how the world kept moving, even when your life felt like it had paused. People were already outside, rushing to work, cars honking on the street, shopkeepers opening their stores. For them, it was just another day. She decided to take a walk. Maybe the fresh air would help clear her head. She didn't have anywhere to go, but sitting inside all day with her thoughts wasn't helping. She grabbed her umbrella, though the sky looked clearer than yesterday, and stepped outside. As she walked down the street, she noticed a small park a few blocks away. It wasn't anything special, just a few benches, some old trees, and a path for morning walkers. But she thought it might be nice to sit there for a while, to escape the noise of the city. She reached the park and found a bench under a big tree. She sat there quietly, watching people pass by. Some were walking dogs, others jogging with headphones on, a few older men chatting near the fountain. For the first time since yesterday, she felt a tiny bit calmer. And then it happened. A sudden shout cut through the calm air. "Help! Someone help!" She turned quickly and saw a small crowd gathering near the path. People were looking down at someone on the ground. Her heart skipped a beat. She ran toward them. A man in his mid-50s was lying on the pavement, clutching his chest, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. He was gasping for breath, his hands trembling. People were panicking. Someone was on the phone with emergency services. Others were just standing there, frozen. But she didn't freeze. Her years at the hospital took over before she even realized it. She pushed through the small crowd and knelt beside the man. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked firmly, her voice steady even though her heart was pounding. His lips moved, but no sound came out. She checked his pulse weak and fast. His breathing was uneven. She tilted his head back slightly, making sure his airway was clear. "Someone call an ambulance." "Now!" she shouted, though she could hear sirens already in the distance. She began CPR, pressing rhythmically on his chest, counting silently in her head. Her hands moved quickly but carefully, the way she had done countless times at the hospital. People watched in stunned silence. Minutes felt like hours. The man's face was still pale, his breath shallow, but she didn't stop. She kept going, until finally she heard the wail of the ambulance getting closer. 2 paramedics rushed over with equipment. "What happened?" one of them asked as they knelt down beside her. "Chest pain. Collapsed about 5 minutes ago," she said, moving back to give them space. Her clothes were damp with sweat, but she didn't even notice. The paramedics worked quickly, attaching monitors, giving oxygen, preparing to move him. One of them looked at her and nodded. "You did good. You probably saved his life." She stepped back as they lifted him onto the stretcher. People started clapping softly, but she barely heard them. Her hands were shaking now that the rush of adrenaline was wearing off. As the ambulance doors closed and drove away, she realized she was still standing in the middle of the path, surrounded by strangers staring at her. She gave a small nod, then quietly picked up her umbrella and walked away. She didn't even think about giving her name. To her, it wasn't about recognition. It was about doing what needed to be done. But she didn't know that this single moment, this act of kindness, was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. That night, she sat by the small window in her apartment, staring at the streetlights below. The day had left her exhausted, but she couldn't stop thinking about the man from the park. She had saved lives before many times during her years as a nurse, but this one felt different. Maybe it was because she wasn't at the hospital anymore. Maybe it was because she was all alone now, with no job, no security, and no idea what tomorrow would bring. As she sat there, the wind carrying the faint sounds of the city into her small apartment, she whispered to herself, "I hope he's okay." She didn't know his name. She didn't know where they had taken him. She only knew that he had been alive when the ambulance doors closed. That was enough for now. She made herself a simple dinner, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept seeing his pale face, the panic in his eyes, the way he clutched his chest. She had seen fear like that before in emergency rooms. in waiting halls, but it never got easier. After dinner, she checked her phone, hoping for some distraction. There were no messages, no calls, nothing new. She sighed and put it aside. The world felt very quiet tonight. But across the city, in a large private hospital, the man whose life she saved was waking up. He blinked against the bright lights above him, his mind slowly piecing together what had happened. He remembered the pain in his chest, the panic, the voices around him, and then her, the woman who had appeared out of nowhere. The one who didn't panic. The one who knelt beside him and took charge like she had done it 1,000 times. He asked the nurse at his bedside, his voice still weak. Who was she? The woman who helped me? The nurse shook her head. We don't know, sir. She left before the ambulance brought you in. Find her, he said softly, but with a determination that surprised even himself. The nurse hesitated. Sir, she didn't give a name. Then ask around, he said firmly. I want to meet her. The staff started asking questions, people in the park, bystanders who had seen the incident. Slowly, a picture began to form. Someone remembered hearing that she used to be a nurse. Someone else thought she lived in a small apartment near the park. By the next day, the man knew enough. Was a businessman, a very successful one. For years he had built companies, created jobs, donated to charities. But this was different. This wasn't about business or charity. This was personal. She had saved his life, and when he learned that she had just lost her job, something inside him stirred. He couldn't understand how someone with such skill and courage could be struggling alone. It didn't seem right. He called his assistant. Prepare the cars, he said. The assistant blinked. Cars, sir? Yes, mine, my brother's, my son's, and my business partner's. We're going to see her. The assistant nodded quickly, not daring to ask questions. The man leaned back in his hospital bed, a small smile playing at his lips. He could already imagine the look on her face when they showed up. Back in her apartment, she had no idea any of this was happening. She spent the day searching for jobs online, sending out a few applications, though she knew it could take weeks. Before anyone replied, she made a list of expenses on a piece of paper: rent, groceries, utilities. The numbers made her heart sink. As the evening light faded, she sat on her balcony again, hugging her knees, staring at the street below. She thought her life was falling apart, but she didn't know it was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The next day began like any other for her. She woke up early, though there was no job to rush to anymore. It was strange, having so much time but no clear purpose. She made tea and stood by the window as the city slowly came to life outside. People walked to work. Children laughed on their way to school. Cars honked in the distance. She felt like an outsider watching a movie she wasn't part of anymore. After breakfast, she sat at the small table with her old laptop, searching for nursing jobs online. Most places wanted experience, and she had plenty of that. But the problem was timing. Applications took weeks, sometimes months, before anything happened. She needed something soon. Her phone buzzed with a text from her landlord, a polite reminder. That rent was due in 10 days. She sighed and closed her eyes for a moment. One problem after another. By noon, she decided to take a short walk. Fresh air always helped when her thoughts got too heavy. She walked to the park again, the same one where everything had happened yesterday. People were there as usual, walking dogs, jogging, chatting on benches. No one recognized her or knew what she had done. That was fine with her. She didn't do it for attention. After a while, she headed home, carrying a small bag of groceries. She climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, placed the groceries on the counter, and sat by the window again with a glass of water. The day felt slow, quiet, ordinary, but then she heard it, the low, powerful sound of engines approaching. She looked out the window and froze. 4 black luxury cars were driving slowly down her street, their polished bodies shining under the afternoon sun. They moved like a small procession, sleek and intimidating. The kind of cars people only saw in movies or on rich city roads, not in this old, quiet neighborhood. One by one, they stopped right in front of her building. People on the street paused. Shopkeepers leaned out of their stores. Children pointed. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. She stood there, heart pounding, staring at the cars below. Who were they here for? The doors opened almost in perfect sync. From the first car stepped a man in a dark suit, tall, confident, the kind of presence that made people move aside without a word. From the second car came another man, slightly younger, also in an expensive suit, speaking into a phone as he looked around. The third and fourth cars brought two more well-dressed men, one carrying a briefcase, the other wearing sunglasses that reflected the entire street. The crowd on the sidewalk began whispering. "Who are they?" someone murmured. "Politicians?" Another guessed. "Maybe celebrities," a teenager said, taking out his phone to record. But then the first man, the one with the commanding presence, looked straight up at her window. Their eyes met. Her breath caught. It was him, the man from the park. The one whose life she had saved. He was standing there now, alive, strong, and looking right at her. She didn't move. She couldn't. He spoke briefly to the others, and then all four men walked toward the entrance of her building. The neighbors outside stared as if watching the beginning of some grand movie scene. She stepped back from the window, her heart thudding in her chest. Why were they here? A knock came at her door. Firm, confident, but not unkind. She opened it slowly, and there he was, the man she had saved, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, gratitude clear in his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled softly and said, "You saved my life, and I believe it's time I did something for you." She stood frozen at the door, her hand still on the handle, unable to believe what was happening. The man she had saved was standing there in front of her, looking healthier than she expected, his suit perfectly pressed, his eyes warm with gratitude. Behind him in the hallway, the other three men waited silently, their polished shoes and expensive watches a strange sight in this old, worn-down building. "May I come in?" the man asked gently. She nodded, still speechless, and stepped aside. He entered slowly, his sharp eyes taking in the tiny apartment, the small table with one chair, the narrow kitchen with its single window, the faint smell of tea lingering. In the air, there was nothing luxurious here, nothing that hinted at the drama unfolding outside. "You saved my life yesterday," he said softly, turning to face her. "I don't know if you understand what that means to me. I have a family, a business, people who depend on me. Without you, I wouldn't be here today." She swallowed hard, unsure what to say. I just did what anyone would do," she murmured. He shook his head firmly. "No." Everyone else froze. "You didn't. You knew what to do. You stayed calm. You gave me a second chance." For a moment, the apartment was quiet except for the distant sound of car engines outside. She shifted nervously. "I'm glad you're okay," she said finally. He studied her face, then spoke again. "I learned something else about you. That you lost your job recently." Her eyes dropped to the floor. She hadn't expected anyone to know that. "I did," she admitted softly. "The hospital made cuts. I was one of them." He nodded slowly, as if confirming what he already knew. "Well," he said, his voice growing warmer, "that ends today." She looked up at him, confused. He stepped aside, and one of the other men entered carrying a slim folder. He placed it gently on the table, then stepped back without a word. The man she had saved gestured toward it. "That is a job offer," he explained, "at my private medical center. Triple the salary you earned before. Better hours, full benefits, and a home allowance so you never have to worry about rent again." Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "And," he added, his smile widening. "The other 3 cars you saw outside? They belong to my family, my brother, my son, and my business partner. They each came here because they want to help too. My brother owns an apartment complex. He says you can move into one of his places rent-free for as long as you need. My son runs a scholarship program. He wants to fund any additional training or courses you ever want to take. And my business partner." He paused, glancing at the man with the briefcase. "He insists on giving you something extra personal gift from all of us." The man with the briefcase opened it and revealed documents for a small savings account set up in her name. Enough to clear her debts and give her a fresh start. She stared at them, her hands trembling. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Say yes," the man said simply. "You saved my life. Let us save yours in return." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She had been so strong these last few days, pretending she was fine, hiding her fears about money and the future. But now, faced with all this kindness, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. "Why? Why are you doing all this?" she asked softly. "Because," he said, his voice steady, "when you were surrounded by strangers and chaos, you didn't hesitate to help me. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't care if I was rich or poor. You just saved me. That kind of heart deserves the world." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll accept." A smile spread across his face. Outside, neighbors watched as she stepped out of her building. A few minutes later, surrounded by 4 luxury cars and 4 men who treated her like family already. Cameras clicked, children pointed, people whispered, but she barely heard them. For the first time in days, her chest felt light. Yesterday, she had saved a life. Today, life had given her one back.